And now what we're going to do is we're going to move into the next section, and this is validation. And I'm going to just change it up a bit, and I'm going to start with you, Loretta, and just wondering, what do you do from a nutrition science perspective with the validation of this food that I understand we still haven't called it vector yet. It's something that's going to be targeted to ambitious active. So what are you doing to validate at this point?
Okay, well, to validate, you need to have something to validate. So our first step is to have the physical product in hand, physically in your hand. What is this product going to look like? At this point, then, there are several functions in the company that are involved: nutrition science, regulatory, research and development, supply chain, plant management. So all of the functions are coming into place now in answering the first question: is it doable? Can we make this product with this nutrition profile in this flaked format? Well, there's all kinds of things we need to consider from an ingredient perspective. The ingredients must be approved for use by the regulations. Are they available? Can we procure the ingredients? And we think of other things like real fruit or whole grain or no artificial flavors. So all of those types of considerations. Secondly, then, if it's a standardized food, as is the case of a meal replacement, we need to make sure that we produce the food to be compliant with the compositional requirements of the food. And there, in a meal replacement, the nutrient levels are given out in a range, and we need to determine what range do we pick for the nutrient level in the food. Of course, nutrition is the factor, but all kinds of other factors: cost and feasibility and taste, and the impact that it has on taste.
So just to go back a minute, you were saying that there's a range for each one of those nutrients in the meal replacement regulation. And so I'm just going to make this really simple. Do you just sort of, those nutrients are in there, and then the food's produced, and then when the food is done, do you have to go back and test it to make sure you hit the range?
Oh, certainly, yes. That's where the product validation does come in, and we go through the testing, the analytical testing, shelf life testing. All of the kind of parameters are met in the food, and so a lot of the research and development parameters for product quality, functionality, taste, texture, shelf life, all of those kinds of tests need to be made, including the nutrient levels.
Wow. So Camilla, Loretta's working with the group. They've made the food. They've got the nutrient distribution that's required for the meal replacement. I guess they give the food to you, and how do you validate the food? What do you do with it?
So from a marketing perspective, innovation development perspective, validation for us is basically where we put food in mouth. So at some point you have to taste the food, and validation is absolutely critical. And if you think about it, if I use an example, so say you're cooking at home, Chris, and you have a recipe of a new food that you want to make.
Right.
And you're following your recipe and you're making lobster bisque.
Okay, you've not been in my house, but yeah. Not that I can make lobster bisque, but let's go.
But you're following the recipe, you're adding in all the ingredients that you need, and you're hoping that when it's done and you are serving it to your family or friends, that it actually tastes good. And it actually tastes like a lobster bisque. But because you didn't taste it along the way, you actually didn't validate it. You didn't actually test the food along the way while you were making your lobster bisque. What we do is like when you're making your lobster bisque and you're putting the ingredients in, you're actually kind of taste testing it along the way.
Right.
And because you're taste testing it, when you put it on the table, you know it's going to taste great.
Right.
Because you've tasted it, you've validated it. So when we do consumer validation with the new food that we're introducing, basically what we're doing is putting food in mouth. And we're putting food in mouth in two kind of areas, internally and externally.
So internally, you mean like in the company, people are eating it?
That's right. So before we put any food in front of consumers for them to taste, we need to make sure it meets our standards. We have strict criteria that we follow, just as Loretta has criteria to follow in terms of meeting the nutrition credentials of the food. We have strict criteria in terms of taste, texture, mouthfeel. It has to be appealing. you're not going to make food that just doesn't taste good because nobody's going to buy it.
Right, and the nutrients aren't good to anybody if they don't eat it.
That's right. And particularly we knew from our target of the ambitious actives, they were not going to forego taste. So taste was credential for them because one of the issues they had was all the other food options that were available to them didn't actually taste so good. So we tested internally. We have professionally skilled, trained sensory scientists that make sure that all these criteria are met internally. Once we basically have kind of the stamp of approval to go from the internal, then we put food in mouth to our consumers.
And so how do you do that? Do you go out and say, I'm looking for ambitious actives, come eat my food?
Yep, there is. Actually, that's what we do. There's two ways we can do it. One is referred to as an IHUT, and the second one is referred to as a CLT.
Okay, so take me through. What do those acronyms mean?
So an IHUT is basically, it stands for in-home usability test. And that's basically where we recruit our ambitious actives because we know who we're looking for now. And we ask them, would you be willing to try the food for us? And if they agree to participate and try the food, we actually ship the food to their house. We send a quantity of food over to them. We ask them to eat it over a week's period of time. During that time, we ask them to keep a diary or a log of when they're eating it, why they're eating it, how are they eating it, are they mixing it with something else, do they like it, don't they like it, and why. And we collect all this information from them. That's one way of doing it.
And the next one?
Yeah. The second one is a CLT, which is central location testing. So this is, if we don't need to understand exactly where they're eating it or how they're eating it, and we want to focus in if they like the taste and like the product of it, we recruit these ambitious actives to come to one place. So they come to us versus us sending them the food.
Okay, so the central location testing, that's why it's called that.
Right,
Yeah.
so they come into a location, usually somewhere that's very accessible, easy for them to get to, whether it's a shopping mall. In this case, it was the gym. Because they're there anyways.
Yeah.
They're looking for the food, so we went there on site. We recruited them and we got them to taste the food. And they complete a very simple survey that captures this information for us. And then we log in all the information and bring it back to the office and understand what's working and what's not working.
So you have this information. You said what's working, what's not working. Do you then course correct? Like what if they say, no, not what I was looking for, or, you know, I would like it to taste more like this, or this isn't the right texture. What do you do with the information? Do you do anything at this point in time? Are you able to actually change the product?
Absolutely. It's so early in the development at this stage.
Okay.
And we truly believe if you're going to ask the consumer, you're going to do something with it.
Right.
If you're not going to do anything with it, then don't ask. But because we're very curious in nature, we obviously ask the questions. And we take that and we understand what are the tweaks we need to make it even better and make it great food? Is it a pinch of this or a pinch of that? And then obviously go back to nutrition to see if we can do it. And if we make those changes, will it change the profile of the food?
Right, because I'm sure Loretta's saying, don't do that because you're going to change the regulations, and we have to make it according to this regulation. And so that's when I guess the debates or discussions happen between the two functions.
That's certainly when we need to work closely together. Any changes that they might want to make in using the consumer results, can we then make them and still ensure that we're compliant?
So you're doing all this validation with consumers. Loretta, is there any validation you're doing with outside people on the product as well?
Yes, we validate externally as well because we need to ensure that our scientific interpretation is accurate. You can almost liken it to the peer review process.
So what do? Do you send it out to health professionals or?
External experts are key in the external validation process. We, in the case of Vector, sought input from members of the research community, the nutrition community, Dietitians of Canada, who had expertise in sports nutrition, and really to ensure that the product was based on sound science, that the product and the platform that we were offering was valid. So we went to the outside, to the experts, to confirm that our interpretation and our expression of the science was valid.
So then tell me about, I know you had some very interesting interactions with the government in terms of them understanding their own regulations in terms of meal replacement. So just maybe tell us a little bit about that interesting conversation.
Yes, that's another area in this case where we did some external meetings and discussions, because government at this point, they had never seen their regulations, their meal replacement regulations applied in this way. So they had lots and lots of questions for us, and we almost helped them interpret their regulations.
For them. So you really must have been curious to ask a lot of questions to help the government understand their own regulations. Very interesting. I'm just wondering, are there any questions, Chris, from the audience about this whole area of validation?
Thanks, Chris. I have a few questions. The first is for Loretta. Vector is a standardized product. How do you determine the nutrition parameters for unstandardized products?
Oh, very interesting. If it's unstandardized, marketing wants to make something, there's no regulation in the book, what do you do?
And that's certainly the case for a lot of foods. So that's a key point, that when we dealt with Vector, we were working with the standard product. But many of the foods on the market, soups and desserts and certain foods don't have standards. So in that case, certainly there's more flexibility and leeway to meet some of the consumer needs and the marketing needs. But again, depending on the product and its placement and the target group that it's going to, from our perspective, we always ask the nutrition question first. So what are the nutrition parameters? What are the dietary guidelines? And try to help meet it in that way. And we're a little bit more flexible.
Right. So if there isn't any sort of scientific regulation to guide you, you use your own science to make sure that you're guiding yourself as if you were your own Health Canada.
And what are the current dietary guidelines, and would this fit? Does it make sense?
Oh, very good. Chris, do we have another question?
This next question is for Camila. You talked about various methodologies for testing. I'm just wondering, in terms of sample size, how big is your sample, and are these tests conducted in rural as well as urban areas?
All right, Camilla. So let's hear about your sample sizes. Looks like somebody has done some research out there, and they know about statistics. And how do you then use your research?
So from a validation perspective, the sample size varies. So the first kind of test we do, where we're doing some IHUTs and CLT tests, it's more qualitative in nature to understand if we need to optimize the food. When we then do quantitative testing, which is a larger sample size, it's always statistically valid. You're looking at 500 plus consumers. We then collect more strict metrics, and we have more strict benchmarks that we have to meet or exceed within CALOS to make sure that we are meeting a sound base of consumers versus a couple of consumers that we're looking at qualitatively. In the exploration stage, a lot of that is qualitative research. So it's getting face-to-face with your consumers. So we're not talking to 500 of them. It may be anywhere between 15 to 50. It depends on what it is that we're exploring. So it does vary in terms of the number of consumers we talk to, but by the time we get to validation, the very last stage that is meeting certain thresholds to make sure you can be successful at market, you're doing a minimum of 500 or so interviews.
Wow. So obviously in the quantitative phase, you're able to get more numbers of consumers.
That's right.
The qualitative are less consumers, but really deep inside their heads.
That's right.
Okay, very interesting. Is there anything else there, Chris?
I have another question here, again for Camila. You talked about deciphering taste preferences. Are there taste preferences that occur, say, between different populations or different countries? Would a product in Canada, say, differ from a product in the United States?
Oh, that's very interesting. Obviously, Kellogg being a global company, what's the different taste profiles? Are they different from one region to another?
So in the case of Vector, the unique thing of Vector is a Canadian-only product. You can only actually buy it here in Canada. But some of our other products that are available internationally, in most cases, it is a standard product, making sure that it meets the credentials of the country that you are in or selling it to. But in some cases, the taste profiles do change from country to country. Some countries like more plain, simple, bland food. Other countries like it spicy, for example, if we're thinking beyond just breakfast cereal, or they like it more sweet. Even within Canada, you can notice a difference between kind of English Canada and Quebec. There is slight different profiles and taste preferences, and you'll see some food performing better in Quebec than it will in English Canada because of those
Different taste profiles.
That's right. So it will change based on the consumer because, in essence, you're making the food for them. We're not making it for the manufacturing plant to be busy. We're making it for them because they're looking for it.
Very consumer directed.
That's right.
Do we have anything else, Chris?
I have one last question.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When doing the IHUT or CLTs, are you looking at only the intrinsic properties of the food, or are you also looking at the extrinsic properties of the food, such as packaging and consumer perception of packaging?
Okay.
So usually at this stage, at the IHUT and CLT stage, brand doesn't exist, a package doesn't exist. It's really about the food at this point, to making sure that the food that we are going to produce is meeting the needs of the consumers. So
is the food in like a white box?
it is.
Oh, okay. Because
It's
there's
in a
no
white
label
box
on it. There's
with
nothing.
No,
Okay.
there's the ingredients. There's allergy warnings
Oh, right,
on
you'd have
it.
to do that,
You have to
yes.
do all those. You still have to meet regulations in that sense. But it's a white box, so there's
Okay.
no branding for it. When we're doing the IHUTs and CLTs, it really is about the food itself.
Okay.
And will you eat it? Do you like it? If you don't like it, how are you eating it? Is it meeting your needs? It's really about the food, not the marketing, not the branding, not the packaging at this point.
That's very interesting because you're getting the consumer very clean of any other interventions in their mind. It's just looking at that food in a white bowl, in a white box, and they don't know what brand it is, what company, anything. Just, do you like that food?
Right.
Certainly, the branding and the packaging and the labeling would be a confounding variable. It might
Right.
influence your results, and then you
Right.
wouldn't get the most accurate result on a measure of the food.
It's a very good
Very
point.
good point, right.